This computer. Hey, podcast listeners, Ria Wong with you once again with Nonprofit Lowdown. Today, I'm talking to my dear friend, Miranda Ling, aka Rosewater Vigilante. You'll tell us all about that, who is the development director for 826 National. And we're going to
826
talk.
Valencia, actually,
Ah, I
which
lied.
is
Okay.
connected to 826 National. We're buds.
All right. We're going to redo that one. My dear friend, Miranda Ling, aka Rosewater Vigilante. And by the way, we're going to get into that whole conversation. She is currently the development director for 826 Valencia. And we're going to talk today about Afrofuturism and fundraising. So, Miranda, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, before we get started, I'm curious, what is Rosewater Vigilante for the folks out there listening?
Yes, yes. So Miranda Ling is sort of like my work name, my career name, my people in life know me as name. And Rosewater Vigilante is sort of my pen name. So for my creative work, for the Afrofuturist stuff that I write, that is the name that I use.
Okay, so for those of us who are unclear, can you give us a quick definition of Afrofuturism?
Yes, yeah. So for me, Afrofuturism is this genre of speculative fiction where we're talking about what could it look like to have Black people in the future? What does it look like to have different narratives that are either based off of Black identities or what Black identities could look like in the future?
And so, in addition to being a fundraising professional, you were also a writer. So, it's so perfect that you're working for 826 Valencia. Can you tell us a little bit more about the intersection of that work and your personal interests?
Yes, yes. So I think about it as like Afrofuturism for me. A big part of it is imagining a better future for Black folks. So, a future in which we are valued, loved, taken care of, well funded, and where communities are able to actually recognize, support, and collaborate with the brilliance in Black communities. So for me as a fundraiser, one of the things that's really important to me is being able to tell the story of not just where we are, but where we want to go. So being able to say, not only is this a future that I imagine in my speculative fiction, this is a future that I imagine in my fundraising, and to get partners invested in this whole reality that when you imagine a future, you're making that future more possible. When you're partnering with funders, you again are funding that ability to make a difference. So for me, it's the intersection of that funding and being able to create that difference.
So, can you talk to us about how you use Afrofuturism in your fundraising to inspire and inform fundraising campaigns?
Yes, yes. So I use Afrofuturism as a reminder to dream bigger. I think one of the things in fundraising that we can really fall short is when we're thinking, oh, well, I mean, they haven't given a gift of this size before. I don't know if I can do it. I mean, just do sort of a small, safe ask, where I think our job as fundraisers is to ask, not to necessarily make a gift happen. So recognizing that you can ask bigger than you might be comfortable for, because you're so excited about this potential future, and you're able to make the case of why this aligns with another person's interest in being able to create a better future for Black communities of color, for our brilliant youth writers. And there's also the whole fact of our students are writers themselves. So being able to see how the futures they write is a really impactful thing for me as a person, but also as a fundraiser and storyteller.
You know, it's so funny. I was talking with my friend Brooke yesterday, and she's a Black woman, and we were saying that we all need to have like that white guy to remind us to ask bigger, because I think like leaning into that Chad energy of being like, yeah, I am gonna ask, like I'm gonna like triple the amount I was thinking about, because why not?
Yeah. Yeah. And even like almost the Janelle Monáe energy of like what would happen, or the Beyonce energy of what would happen if we had the funding we deserve. So even like Chad doesn't even need to be in the picture. For me, like that's the joy of Afrofuturism, is that we can dream bigger based on ourselves, because we are here because our ancestors were able to dream bigger. And in the way that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams as a Black queer femme who has a wife and is able to have this life that literally my Black queer ancestors were dreaming about. It is our job to have wild dreams so those next generations can actually inhabit them.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much because you're so right. It has to start in the mind. And like you and I connected because, and there's a little bit of a detour, but we were talking about money mindset and the ways in which we keep ourselves sort of, we play small. So wondering if you could just detour for us a little bit about the ways in which you've helped yourself to stop thinking small. Because, saw your LinkedIn, you're the $30 million fundraiser. That's a big number. And I often think, especially folks of color, we do put these constraints on ourselves, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like we like pre-reject ourselves or pre-reject the ask. So talk to me a little bit about that personal journey for you, if you will.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I realized, having gone to Stanford for undergrad and my master's degree as well, was just recognizing that there are resources out there. The wealth is there. That it is not a lack of abundance out there. It's just the distribution of abundance that needs some work. So having seen all of that wealth, I recognize that, oh wait, there are folks who have these buckets of money, who do want to make a difference, who are interested in changing the world, and being able to provide an opportunity to say, hey, here's a really incredible organization that's doing work that you care about because we love XYZ, being able to align on that and being able to ask for what you need, but also asking for you want. So asking for what you want and then being able to land where you need. So thinking like, okay, I think it would be really ambitious to ask people to double their gifts. For example, that was a fundraising campaign that I did during the beginning of COVID, asking folks to consider to double their investment, because I was like, that seems ambitious. They've given a lot of funds, but this is an important time. I can make the case of why it is so important for us to be investing in education at this time. Would you meet the moment and step up to double your gift? And I was expecting some response, but I had a board member who doubled her gift from 1 million to 2 million. I had another board member who was previously giving 100K, who was able to then step up to 1 million. So even that doubling, like I thought I was dreaming big, but even more was possible. So I think it's being able to have that wild imagination of like, what could $1 million do? What could $2 million do? What could we make possible with that amount of funding, and having folks be able to land where it fits for them.
One thing that you're saying that I really want to lift up here is, it seems to me that your background as a writer and creator is really helpful in fundraising, because so much of what we do is we present a compelling vision for the future for people to really invest in. So, can you say a little bit about how you use storytelling and specifically Afrofuturist storytelling in the interactions that you have with donors?
Yeah. It can look like either. One example is we have a Black Literary Achievement Club as part of 826 Valencia, and that's working with middle and high school students, where we publish students in these professional books, and they get to leave as published authors. So talking to students about what kind of futures do they think are possible, and then being able to say, being able to hear their stories and be able to share those stories with donors of, there's this student who's imagining this world where there's a Black superhero who can change her color based on which portal in the sky and which sort of world and dimension she's going to, and being able to share the creativity, joy, and sense of possibility of, when you give students a platform, so much more is possible. That's something to be able to connect to with donors, of saying like, they're imagining another world is possible. we also know another world where students are having that individualized attention and supporting their writing, where we're able to support teachers by bringing in volunteers. Like that was all sort of speculative 20 years ago before 826 Valencia started, but now is something that we are literally doing. And the speculative part is, okay, how would we make it so these services that we're offering, which is free writing, tutoring, and publishing programs for San Francisco youth, how could we make this possible for all of these students in schools that don't have enough funding? How would it be possible to support all of these teachers who are having 30 kids in a classroom with an additional 5 or 6 volunteers and our trained staff to come in and work with their students one-on-one? What would be possible then? And being able to pose that question, as well as mention examples of our alumni, folks like Javier Zamora, who was in our program as a high schooler, but now is a New York Times bestselling author for his memoir, Solito. And being able to say, like, these are the writers of tomorrow, these are the thinkers of tomorrow, these are the future leaders that we have, and being able to support them with telling their own story is something that not only benefits the students, but benefits us as a society. We are better off when we hear their stories and listen to students, and our world will be better when we're investing in our youth.
You know what strikes me, Miranda, is, so much of the last couple of years, we've had, well, I don't know how but different conversations at the institutional level about philanthropy, particularly following, George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I guess what I'm struck by is the way that you talk about Afrofuturism feels like a community rooted in joy and possibility versus like Black pain. And I'm really, I don't know, is there a response to that?
Yeah,
Like, is that on purpose?
yeah, that is absolutely true. One of the many joys of my life was when I was TAing a class on race policing and mass incarceration by Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt. We had a guest lecturer who happened to be the one and only Angela Davis. And as the TA, I got to have dinner with her and with a lot of the other folks who were organizing the program. And my question for her, as someone who has been doing the work for decades, was like, how do you not burn out? And to sort of paraphrase her response, it was about like, it's not what we're fighting against, it's what we're fighting for. And being able to keep that top of mind, being able to remember the why behind wanting a better future for our peoples, being able to connect to what we're fighting for is more love and more justice and freedom and all of these really exciting and invigorating things, that it's not just fighting against stuff, because you will burn out if you are just going against things, because the systems are built to break you down and are built to resist the resistance. So it's not just like breaking down what used to be, but it's also building what can be possible in the future and what we think should be possible in the future.
So I'd love to live in this world of like future casting with you, right? Because I think historically, philanthropy in this country, and in particular institutional philanthropy, been a very traditional model, which is, there's a lot of white saviorism and tropes, and the idea of like some old white dude behind a desk, like making decisions about funding. So, in your wildest dreams, like how might Afrofuturism change the way that philanthropy is done in this country?
Ooh, in my wildest dreams, it would be philanthropy with this idea of radical generosity and recognizing that there is a need for a redistribution of wealth, and that these organizations or foundations or philanthropic institutions that have funds, that the idea would be to give it all away to organizations and to folks actually making the difference, to actually give it all away. Because I know a lot of foundations will sort of give away the bare minimum, or like what is a little bit, but recognizing that we don't want a future where philanthropy is needed forever. We want a future that these problems have been solved with funding that we have today. So I think having, emptying out those DAFs, having folks actually give the funding that is there, being able to spend down, recognizing that that philanthropic institutions don't need to live forever if we are solving problems today, and thinking about that radical mindset of what would happen if those coffers were emptied and redistributed, and what kind of world would be possible then.
This is such an interesting. I'm like trying to formulate a good question here, but um, how do you like enter into the conversation with people who might have? Well, let me actually start here. What are some of the common misconceptions of Afrofuturism? Because I do think that can be, for people who are unfamiliar with what that means, that could be like, oh, I don't know if that's a conversation I want to have. So, what are some of the common obstacles and misconceptions that you experience?
Yeah, I think part of it is this idea that it's sort of exclusionary and saying that like Black people only, where for me, Afrofuturism is saying like there are Black people in the future, because when you are seeing a lot of particularly like sci-fi and these stories of the future written not by people of color, written by white folks, a lot of times it'll be all these white people on a spaceship, and it's like, literally, where are did we survive? Was there a genocide that we aren't talking about? Like, how did it get that way? And being able to say, actually, Afrofuturism is saying there are Black people in the future, there are other people in the future as well, and it's not saying there's only Black people in the future, but saying that we exist now and we exist in the future, and trying to make space for Black futures that aren't just trauma and pain and suffering, but are joy and liberation, and being able to have like fun space drama that's not just like traumatic shit.
I love fun space trauma.
My favorite genre.
Drama, not trauma. Drama, people.
Yeah.
um, so how might you enter into that conversation with, like, let's say you have a white donor
Mhm, mhm.
and when you say Afrofuturism, they may not understand sort of the scope of what that means. They may not understand like what you're talking about. So like how do you come from a space like the spirit of Afrofuturism and get people to where you know to where you're like on the same page?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like, I'm not going to jump in with a word like Afrofuturism, because like even in this conversation, it's clear that that's something that really needs a definition. It's more sort of asking questions and understanding, is it sort of the literacy aspect of our work that appeals to them? Is it supporting the youth voices of tomorrow? Is it being interested in having our students published? Like, what is this future that we're both excited about? And then being able to talk to that. So it's not necessarily saying, I'm an Afrofuturist and this is the future that I imagine for just these students. It's more, I have seen the impact of the Black Literary Achievement Club, having participated as a mentor for a year and seeing students grow from being reluctant writers to being really proud published authors presenting their work at the Museum of the African Diaspora, which actually happened this fall, where they were actually signing books to say that like this is their work. And it was like an author signing table with our student authors, and being able to connect on again that sense of possibility of what kind of joyful futures are possible when we're funding programs that are investing in youth, because that's an area of connection. Or if it's something around like more sort of economic opportunities, or making it so folks are having opportunities as they're growing up to be able to work in different fields, being able to say like communication and writing is something that's necessary in all of these fields, and here's how it has helped students become both the New York Times bestselling writers, but also be able to work in the fintech space in Silicon Valley. So it's really really understanding what kind of future they're excited about, and being able to connect, here's how the work we are doing today is making that future more possible.
So if I'm listening to you on the podcast or here on this Zoom call, and 'Cause I think what's so radical about Afrofuturism, which I think is radical for all, dare I say all communities of color, is to imagine a world of possibility in the future that is not, traumatic and awful and violent. Um, how might you suggest that folks who want to explore
Mhm.
what Afrofuturism could look like for them and in their fundraising practice do? Like any
Yeah.
practical tips?
Yeah, yeah. So one practical tip that like both for fundraisers, but for all kinds of folks, this is a practice that I did both with students in our Black Literary Achievement Club and at Stanford when I was supporting a class that was talking about Black liberation and freedom. Is this idea of writing yourself a permission manifesto where you like literally take 5 minutes with a notebook and sitting like, I give myself permission to ask big. I give myself permission to recognize that I can ask for funds. And even if the answer is no, that's okay. I give myself permission to fail sometimes. I give myself permission to take risks. And just writing over and over again, I give myself permission to, is a really good practice of being able to say, oh, wait, like there are all these things that I have been waiting for some other entity to give me permission to do these things, but the only permission I really need is me. And being able to start with yourself and give yourself that permission to dream bigger, ask bigger, believe in a better future, and being able to tie that back to the work that you're doing. Another practice that I really like and I've done with my team is actually writing a letter to yourself, a letter of gratitude, but from yourself from a year from now. So being able to say, like, I am so glad we overraised. I'm so glad we hit all of our targets. I am so grateful that this idea that you came up with was really successful. And just writing from this space of actually inhabiting the excitement and joy and satisfaction that comes from actually meeting and exceeding goals and being able to approach that work with gratitude for yourself for the work that you've put in and or the work that you're sort of going to be putting in over the next year. And I found that is a really helpful reframe when we're talking about strategic planning. Sometimes it can be like, oh, this is big, this is scary, I don't know how it's exactly going to work for the next, tomorrow or the day after. But being able to kind of zoom out and be like, what would it look like if we were able to meet all of those goals and exceed all of those goals and come from that space of possibility and appreciation, makes it a much more fun conversation, and also gets you out of that kind of fight or flight mode where you're not able to imagine or be creative, to this generative space where you're feeling comfortable enough to be creative and recognizing that the the future that you're envisioning is possible with the tools that you have or with collaboration with other folks who have those tools that you don't have.
So one thing that's like tickling my brain right now, because I'm loving what you're saying, which is really about engaging the prefrontal cortex to get the amygdala out of flight freeze. And I'm also just thinking, particularly for fundraisers of color, burnout is a huge issue. And so I'm wondering, how have you counteracted burnout, to go back to your earlier point, like what pulls you and how might you advise other fundraisers of color who might be finding this work hard or might be finding that they're in situations where they're experiencing micro or even macro aggressions?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know for me, one of the biggest supports is the fact that I not only as like director of advancement get to lead the marketing communications and fundraising, I also get to tutor in our classrooms with students once a week. So for me, it's like being able, for me, it's on Tuesdays, like going into Tenderloin Community School and getting to work with this classroom full of brilliant third graders and getting to reconnect on on that really personal basis with this group of 4 students that I've been working with, since September, and getting to see their progress. Where one student, like, is writing his letter to himself, and he is including dialogue as a third grader, and is having all of these brilliant ideas, and being able to connect to the why behind the work is it's not just like, I'm not just like asking for money. It's like, I am able to support the funding of an organization that is bringing in all of these adults to give attention to these brilliant, brilliant kids who have so many good ideas and need more individualized attention. And being able to, for me, again, it's like connecting to the why, having that connection to not just talking about students or talking about our programs, but actually being able to participate in them and have that emotional impact of like, this is so impactful and meaningful for me that I'm better able to speak to this with external folks. And I think as far as sort of generalized burnout, I think it's also like recognizing your own limits and being able to say like, all right, I'm going to put down the laptop at 5 p.m. and like actually close it down, is being able to create boundaries for yourself and recognizing that you're saying no to things that are making saying sort of yes to the things you actually want to say yes to more possible. So I think like as Oprah said, like no is a full sentence. Being able to recognize that you are able to make demands and make asks and advocate for yourself. And if you're in a situation that feels rough, like imagine a better situation and then go find that maybe at another organization. Like we do ourselves the disservice by not recognizing the talents that we have. And as fundraisers of color, we're able to speak to a lot of this work that's oftentimes working with communities of color. We're able to speak to it in a really unique way. And other organizations will also appreciate and see that. And if you're not feeling seen or appreciated, maybe that's not the place to be. Maybe it's time to make a move. So also recognizing that if you're not in an organization that is supporting you, like if a microaggression happens and you share it with someone and they're just like, "Oop, that sucks," like that's time to go, versus an organization's like, okay, how do I support you in that? How do we make this better? That maybe that's a donor we don't need to work with anymore in the future. So being able to say like, being able also to name when those things are happening and asking for the supports that are needed to be able to process some of that, because that is definitely something that happens.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And the thing that's coming up for me is like we feel disempowered when we feel like we don't have a choice, that when we're backed
Yeah,
against a wall.
yeah,
The truth is like you always have a choice.
yeah, yeah,
And particularly if you're a fundraiser and a fundraiser of color, like, yeah, you're kind of sitting in the driver's seat right now. Like we're in a moment where A, people are not finding the development staff that they need, and B, are desperately looking for folks of color to take on roles of, and positions of leadership. So,
yeah,
y'all, do not suffer if you don't have
yeah.
to.
Yeah, and don't underestimate the value that you're bringing. I think that's like another sort of piece of Afrofuturism, is recognizing the bounty of the gifts that we have already, and being able to see that. Like I think it's Octavia Butler, and forgive me if this is a misquote, but she's saying like the best science fiction tells us about today. That it's this idea of being able to understand the moment that we are right now, using speculative fiction as a way into that.
Okay, so this is a really interesting question because right now everything that's science fictiony is super dystopic and like really not fun. Like I just
Yeah.
watched The Last of Us and I'm like, damn, this future's really bleak, y'all. Like the fungi are gonna take over our brain. So I guess I'm wondering like what what does it look like to imagine a future that is not the zombie apocalypse, like
Yeah,
how
yeah.
do we get out of the doom spiral that I feel like we've all been in the last 3 years?
Yeah, I think one sort of specific example that I really is series of short stories, How Long Till Black Future Month, by N.K. Jemisin, which like number one, the title already got me, but one of the stories in there, The Ones Who Stay and Fight, is about this city that is celebrating farmers, that is like an alternate kind of world where they have been able to address racism and sexism, that where there are not where there are social services supporting all people, where there is this appreciation for all types of labor and not just the certain kinds in sort of the capitalistic system that we have, where there's this different system entirely. So I think it's like recognizing that there are different stories of the future, and recognizing like, if this is a story that is just like bringing me down, I don't need to read that. Like, I want stories that excite and interest me, or are telling me about worlds I didn't even know were possible. And I'll also say, like, our students write incredible stories. There's one of our students who was interested in starting her own community health like center as an adult, told this story of a city that is able to be basically a community health center that is being able to provide people with all of the supports they need for their wellness, and being able to imagine that, like, what that kind of city would look like, makes it a little bit easier, because there are many versions of, here's all of the terrible things that could happen in the future. And it's like, if I want to know about terrible things, I will watch the news. Like, I don't go to fiction for that. So being able to like choose who are these authors that you're reading. There's a lot of folks who are writing really interesting things. And even folks like Octavia Butler, she wrote about like some dark ass California 2020 times where that resemble our present day more than she had wanted herself. Being able to see okay, if this is a really difficult situation, what are the lessons learned here? What were the ways that they survived? How do they build community when things are falling apart? And specifically, I'm talking about the Parable of the Talents series by Octavia Butler, where she's talking about this future California, but has this Black protagonist who's like, I am going to survive this. How am I going to do that? And seeing how she is able to make community, how she is able to create a way through in a situation that feels impossible, and recognizing that, like, in that series, there's a lot of like, God is change, all that changes you. Like, recognizing that change is always going to happen, change is inevitable. It's how you work with and mold change, not how you just let things happen to you. It's how do you adjust? Because there will always be a new challenge, and that's an opportunity to either learn, or that's an opportunity to shrink from the opportunity that's just on the other side of that challenge.
So, Miranda, I'm gonna ask a little bit of a devil's advocate question, which is, when we use narrative to imagine, you know, Afrofuturism or a utopia. I mean, like, quick side note, this summer I had a retreat with my Asian boss ladies, and one of the workshops was with a graphic artist who had us imagine an Asian women's utopia. And like, we're all grown women, and it just felt like so revolutionary. Like, wait a second, there could be a world in
Yeah.
which like Asian women are thriving and like taken care of and nurtured. Like, what? What does that even mean? So I guess my question to you is like, I'm down with everything you're saying. What's the difference between like imagining a future that we believe can be possible and being delusional? Because I think, we could
Mhm.
also say like, that's great, Miranda, but like, that's story time. And we're living in this world right now where like terrible things are happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like recognizing that like the present day we are living in was someone's delusion 50 years ago. That what we take for granted today, things like having majority of white people sort of approve of MLK, like in MLK's day, that was not the case. Like, people did not think that was ever going to be the case. So recognizing that things we take for granted today as just given, things like smartphones, were seen as delusional ideas, 100 years ago. So I think it's recognizing that we don't exactly know what the future looks like, and being able to play in that space of possibility, that that there is more to sort of this world than meets the eye, and there's more to the future than we can expect. And it's not about necessarily being grounded in just like what is possible tomorrow, but what is possible sort of in the long term. So I think part of it is also like, what's the time scale that you're talking about? Like if it's like, okay, I want everyone to be free like today at 5 p.m., like, all right, maybe that's not going to work. But in 100 years, like what are the steps that we need to actually get there to a future point? So I think it's also leaving the door open of like this work isn't going to be done with us, like just like our ancestors had to be doing this their whole lives. Like freedom is not an endpoint. It can be sort of a process and something sort of to work towards. So it's not about having sort of this perfect future tomorrow. It's about perfecting the future every day as you're building it and imagining it yourself.
I love that so much. Okay, two more questions for me, and I'd love to open it up to the audience here. But how might an organization be intentional about building Afrofuturism into their practice, into their communications, into the ways that they engage with donors? Like, tactically, what could that look like?
Yeah, I think it could look like reading stories like N.K. Jemison's, The Ones Who Stay and Fight. It could look like listening to authors, reading actually specifically Octavia's Brood, one of my absolutely favorite short story collections edited by Adrienne Marie Brown and Walida Emerisha, but having all of these stories about what kind of futures are possible, written by activists and social justice and sort of change makers, and seeing the idea that social justice is an act of speculative fiction. We're trying to create a better future, and we're needing to imagine that first. So being able to connect to that space of imagination, and that part of our role as people who are trying to make the world a more just and loving place is to make space for imagining what is possible, and taking the time not just to talk about all the things we're fighting against and all the, horrible sexist, racist, classist, dangerous things out there, but like, what are those futures where a Black queer femme or a trans person or all of these different identities and communities, where they can be safe and where we can be valued? Like what would that feel like? And making space for that appreciation for a potential future makes it a lot easier, and makes the work, for me, is the reminder of like, oh yeah, this is like why I'm doing the work, is to be able to make these futures more possible. It's not to get there tomorrow, but to get some of it tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. So, how might you recommend like people be allies to Afrofuturists? And the question is like, do you also have to be Black to be an Afrofuturist?
I think like one way to be allies to the Black community, again, is like listening to Black people, like listening to our versions of what futures we're looking for, and listening to the activists who are saying, hey, like these systems are not only fucked up, but like I will help you imagine a better future, and recognizing that there are thinkers out there who are creating alternatives to this prison system that we have, who are creating alternatives to all of these different systems that we have, and recognizing that there are people creating the future right now. And even the Black Panther Party, a lot of what they did in their like a 10-point program, that was being able to imagine like, what do we want for Black folks? So I think a lot of that allyship is listening and saying like, okay, if we want to be a community that's supporting Black folks, like let's listen to what they are telling us and what they have been telling us for centuries.
Okay, last question here for me. What is on, if you were Professor Ling, if you were to create a reading list for our listeners, what's on that reading list? I know you talked about a couple. already, but top 5 reading list.
Yes, I'll just say like authors because if it's books, we would be here for forever. But basically everything by N.K. Jemisin, everything by Octavia Butler, everything by Nalo Hopkinson, everything by Nnedi Okorafor, Tomi Adeyemi. There's so many brilliant thinkers, and even with N.K. Jemisin, I could like talk about all of her books that I've read because they have such brilliant world building with really diverse sets of characters, and being able to have these authors who are able to imagine futures with all different kinds of people, Black folks and other folks as well, like is a really amazing syllabus. That is sort of what I do in my free time as well.
Well, and so much of what you're saying is really resonating with me around this idea of being intentional about using your imagination, using creativity, using narrative and storytelling in fundraising practices, in communications, in the way that you run your nonprofit. Because I feel like nonprofit life is so frenzied that we get really stuck in the weeds of like here and now, and like next week we got to do this thing. But like if we could actually take the time to think about the future that we're creating together, that could be really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, my friend, this has been so fun. Thank you so much for sharing. And for folks
Here.
on the call, well, is it all right if I have folks connect with you via LinkedIn?
Yes, yeah, LinkedIn is great. So I love to connect to folks, can talk about sort of fundraising all day, as well as Afrofuturism. So definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I also, if you're interested in hearing about some of my Afrofuturistic story, I have finally posted on YouTube the first episode of The Lavender Files, which is my Afrofuturistic film noir radio drama on YouTube, The Lavender Files, by Rosewater Vigilante. So that's another way to connect as well.
I love that. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes for folks who want to connect with you. And P.S. Congratulations, because you and I had talked about this back in the summer, and you were dragging your feet. So good job, you did it.
It happened. Yes, yeah. You
I'll
helped me
definitely.
imagine that world where I am actually putting my work out there, and now it is out there.
Uh, it's so it's so kind of you to say help you imagine a world because most of the people I coach would say that I am just a massive pain in the ass until it happens. But hey, whatever.
There's many ways to make change. All that framing, you know.
All right, friend. This has been so fun. I'll make sure to include all your info in the show notes, including the YouTube video. And please connect with Miranda. She is a brilliant thinker, a brilliant fundraiser, and stays in that really generative narrative storytelling space, which is why I think she's probably such an effective fundraiser.
Thank you. Really
Thanks.
appreciate you having me here.
Have a good day, everyone.